If you're the Attorney General, at some point, you actually have to deliver the goods. There's this whole world of Trump supporters that, they believed in QAnon, they believe in the Epstein conspiracies. What the base really wants is some kind of neat and tidy conclusion to this. Part of the hopes that they had was that the Trump administration would come in and they would finally show the proof.
Pam Bondi is under pressure. The Attorney General is facing criticism, even from within the MAGA movement, over the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. In a February interview with Fox News, Bondi was asked about Epstein's client list. Her reply, "It's sitting on my desk right now to review." But now we're told that there is no client list and that there is no, quote, credible evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals. Those findings come from a recent joint FBI-DOJ memo that called Bondi's earlier claims into massive question. Now, this isn't the first time that the Attorney General's veracity has been called into question. In April, she credited fentanyl seizures under the Trump administration with saving 258 million lives. The claim that roughly 3/4 of the American population would have perished if not for those seizures was widely derided. A recent op-ed here at The Hill argued she had greatly exaggerated the alleged crimes of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, making claims at a press conference that were not reflected in Garcia's actual indictment. On top of all that, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez also says she has been unable to get clarification from Bondi on whether she, AOC, is under criminal investigation, as had been rumoured on the right. Journalist Paul Waldman wrote about Bondi in a recent column for MSNBC headlined, "Why Pam Bondi Can't Deliver What MAGA Demands." Paul, who also writes the Cross-Section newsletter on Substack and hosts a podcast of the same name, joins me now. Paul, the basic charge here is that Bondi is, metaphorically speaking, writing checks that she can't cash, right?
Yeah, I think so. And, she's a figure that really comes from this world. But the point that I was making in that column is that what Trump's really his core base wants is a kind of result that is very hard for even as devoted an attorney general as her to deliver. And I think the Epstein stuff is a good example. They have all these wild conspiracies about Epstein. Who knows what the truth is? But if there's a client list of his somewhere, Donald Trump is almost certainly on it. The two were good friends for a long time. But, they want all the conspiracies to be true. And part of the hopes that they had was that the Trump administration would come in and they would finally show the proof, and now you have even people like Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, and Dan Bongino, the deputy director, who themselves had propagated these same conspiracy theories. Now they're saying, well, we don't really have any evidence. And, the people who were such devoted fans of Trump and so caught up in this world of conspiracy theorizing, they believed that now they're finally going to get to see all this stuff. And if you're the Attorney General, at some point, you actually have to deliver the goods. They can start an investigation, for instance, of James Comey and John Brennan, which they have done now, because those people are critics of Donald Trump. Now, so far, it's not illegal to criticize Donald Trump. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah.
So, they can investigate them, and that'll be terrible for them. But eventually they'll have to say, well, we actually have evidence that they did something wrong. And if they don't, I think you're going to see those MAGA people just continue to be frustrated with her and in some ways with the whole administration.
We'll come to those broader questions in a second, but in relation to the Epstein thing, do you think that is particularly damaging for Bondi? Because I know you were mentioning, conspiracy theories, and I think there are some pretty wild conspiracy theories out there. And even with Epstein, some people claim to know for certain things that nobody knows for certain. But, on the other hand, you have a guy who was a predator on a large scale, very connected with very powerful people, some of whom are from each party, one of whom is indeed Donald Trump. And then to say on one hand, the list's on my desk, and then it's like, well, the list doesn't exist. Is that particularly damaging?
I think so. For that group of people who are really Donald Trump's most devoted fans. That makes it seem like, they're always ready to say you've disappointed us and you're not really on the team after all, because the borders of the team are always shifting. And as I said, at some point she has to actually deliver the goods. Now, I should say that in most ways, as certainly as Trump himself is concerned, she is delivering the goods. I mean, she has turned the Justice Department into what he always wanted it to be, which is his personal law firm that would harass his enemies, drop every case against his friends and supporters, and just be there to answer any whim that he has. She's doing that without question. And we're now hearing stories being reported about just sort of mass firings or firings of people, even one by one, who have any connection to anything like January 6th prosecutions. The morale of the Justice Department is apparently just, in the toilet. And so all that, as far as Trump is concerned, is great. But there's this whole world of Trump supporters that, they believed in QAnon, they believe in the Epstein conspiracies. Even if, as you say, he was a figure with lots of high level connections who was indeed a predator. But they want, I think what the base really wants is some kind of neat and tidy conclusion to this. It's like how they always used to say that any minute the QAnon people, that Donald Trump would be making mass arrests and Hillary Clinton would be in chains and executions would start. They're always waiting for that day to begin,
Mm.
and it never did. And now, you have a president that is more unleashed than he was in his first term, and that kind of stuff, despite all that he is doing and all of the things that he's delivering, for the conservative movement and for his own power, that sort of real kind of lurid fantasy that they've always held, that's not coming true this time either.
Mm. And that does seem to be a broader MAGA issue where, as you've kind of alluded, making these kinds of wild claims is incentivized because a lot of his supporters really love that stuff and really respond to it. But then at a certain point, the rubber hits the road and a rather less sensational truth emerges. So that conflict's a problem, right?
Yeah, and I think it's been a problem for the whole party for a long time that, they see this stuff. I think it's important to understand, like Republican members of Congress, they watch Fox News, they listen to right wing radio and podcasts. They know what their people are being fed, and they're very attuned to all of this conspiracy theorizing. And then they respond. And so, for instance, you have the House Oversight Committee and its chair, James Comer, who spent 4 years during the Biden administration saying that he was like on the verge of, unmasking the great Biden conspiracy, and it was always right around the corner, and it never came. And they respond to the desire, the market for that among their base, but in the end, they have to come up with something. And, they could never come up with a conspiracy that showed that Joe Biden really was the head of a criminal organization, just like they were never able to show that, Hillary Clinton personally ordered the deaths of Americans in Benghazi. And, they were never able to show that there is a worldwide conspiracy of liberals who are drinking the blood of children. And it's one thing to kind of indulge that stuff among your party's base, but once you have power, then they expect you to really come through and prove it.
Mm.
And because all of that stuff is just a fantasy, they can't prove it.
Mm. And just finally, Paul, do you think that there will be a political price paid for that sort of conflict or disconnect, whether it's by Pam Bondi or anyone else? Because you mentioned some of the things, whether it's QAnon or the Pizzagate stuff, and even people who were sort of proponents of that, it didn't seem to they didn't seem to politically suffer by the lack of any foundation to it. Now, I get that what Bondi's doing is different from the QAnon stuff, but the fact that they are now in power and not being able to come up with any evidence, will there be a political punishment, for want of a better term, for that, in your opinion, or not?
I think it's possible that you could see some of those real hardcore people just kind of lose their enthusiasm over time. That it's not like they're going to go and become Democrats, but they may just not be so excited about the Republican Party, especially, a couple of years from now, as we move toward the post-Trump era in Republican politics. Somebody else is going to have to try to take that mantle. And I think a lot of those people who were mobilized by this kind of thing may feel like, well, if Donald Trump didn't give me what I really wanted and unmask all the conspiracies, then I'm not going to believe that, Marco Rubio or Ron DeSantis or whoever is going to do it. They could stay home in the midterm elections. They could be less enthusiastic in 2028. And it's not that they're going to, I think, en masse say, oh, I was wrong all along. I don't think that's going to happen. That's really not how conspiracy theories work, really. But I think you could see kind of a lessening of that fervor that really helped propel Trump forward for the entirety of his career up until now.
Do you think that a segment of those people might go to even kind of darker areas and think, well, now Trump and Bondi and everyone else is part of this conspiracy, the truth must be out there? Do you expect a fringe, at least, to take that kind of view?
I think that there's always that danger that there's kind of a fringe of the fringe, and those are the people who end up doing things that are really, really dangerous and are not just ranting at their families. But, what happens to them, what kind of damage they do, if they become violent, who knows? It's always a possibility.
Paul Waldman, on that rather bleak note, we appreciate you joining us here at The Hill.
Thanks a lot.